Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, could a Major League Baseball team be moving to North Carolina? The bigger question, who pays for it? We'll have all the details coming up. And a good Monday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show with you 24/7 on demand. It is totally free and easy to do. Just head on over to your favorite podcast app, search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. You can also get access to our daily show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. We are expecting a very busy week in the North Carolina General Assembly as we approach the July the 4th holiday coming up this weekend. Lawmakers, according to a schedule published months ago by House Speaker Destin Hall, are slated to be done with all of the business of the legislative short session this week, and that means that the discussion and the topic of a state budget remains as hot as ever. That parlays into an interesting article I caught over the weekend over at WRAL. They have this headline. They published this Saturday evening. North Carolina has a plan to pay for a $1.7 billion baseball stadium. Why lawmakers can't agree. Over the last couple of years, there has been a growing conversation within Major League Baseball about doing another expansion. The current MLB commissioner in Rob Manfred has made it pretty abundantly clear, if you've listened to the words directly from his mouth, that he wants to expand Major League Baseball by 2 additional teams when his term comes to an end, or by the time his term comes to the end as MLB commissioner, which is set for January 2029. And with that, well, North Carolina has really kind of boiled to the top as it relates to a state that could be eligible for an MLB expansion. There's this kind of baseball hole that exists on the East Coast as you get south of Washington, D.C., the Nationals, the team there, and then between Atlanta, Georgia, where the Braves play. There is nothing in between. North Carolina, Tennessee, South Carolina, no Major League Baseball in any of those 3 states. And as it stands right now, North Carolina, which I believe is the 8th or 9th most populous state in the nation, is the largest without a Major League Baseball team. Now, let me set the groundwork on this. I love baseball. I'm a huge baseball fan. The concept of having a professional Major League Baseball team in North Carolina, it would be most predominantly or most probably be in our state's capital in Raleigh, from a fan's perspective, is really cool. As a baseball fan, as a professional sports fan, to be able to go to Raleigh and watch Major League Baseball and not have to drive to Washington, D.C., drive to Atlanta, Georgia, or fly somewhere else to see Major League Baseball is a really cool premise and a really cool concept. There is, however, a major issue with the discussion that is now taking place. Is it the taxpayer in the state of North Carolina that is going to foot the bill for, or at least a large portion of the bill for, stadium construction? We've seen over the last, maybe 15 or 20 years, when major sports franchises, whether it's NHL, NBA, MLB, or the NFL, when teams are going through the process of building a new stadium, we unfortunately see all too often that it is the taxpayers of said state, the taxpayers in certain areas of a state, that are the ones that are essentially burdening the cost responsibility associated with a stadium. And as much as I love professional sports, as much as I love baseball and I love the NFL, I do not think that is the role of state government. I don't think it makes sense for taxpayers. We'll use North Carolina as the example because this is where a lot of the conversation is likely to probably pivot in the weeks to come. I don't believe that taxpayers from the mountains to the coast should be responsible for funding a $1.7 billion baseball stadium. Again, I love baseball. I would love the ability to much more easily and much more quickly go up to Raleigh and watch baseball than I would be driving to the Nationals Park up in D.C. or driving down to Atlanta, Georgia. I love baseball, but it does not make sense for the taxpayers to fund this. And we'll get into all of the different details on this. I've got some studies that have been done over the last, this one is from 2022, talking about the impact of professional sports. We'll look at some details out of the Buffalo Bills' new stadium, which is just coming online. I think they had a ribbon cutting last week or the week before. You may have seen the funny clip of New York Governor Kathy Hochul trying to get the crowd all into it, chanting from the microphone. The crowd was not having any part of that. That stadium in New York was in large part funded by taxpayers in that state. Ticket prices are outrageous. So we'll work through all of those details. So let's start going back to this piece that was published over the weekend at WRAL News. Brian Murphy and Jack Hagel have the story over there. And it reads as follows. Leaders of the North Carolina Senate, that would be Senate Leader Phil Berger and other Republican leaders in the majority, are pushing for a government-backed framework for a $1.7 billion Raleigh stadium, a plan that would support a Major League Baseball expansion bid, a legislative proposal reviewed by WRAL News on Saturday revealed. But House leaders' opposition to public funding of the project has kept the proposal out of the state budget for now and is not expected to make the final spending plan, according to people familiar with the negotiations. So this is what the Senate proposal and the Senate negotiation called for. It called for $500 million, $500 million for those keeping track at home, in state funding, with the rest of the stadium money coming from local revenue sources, sports gambling taxes, which are slated to go up, personal income tax withholdings from players and performers at the facility, and the creation of a sports and entertainment taxing district. Also in the Senate proposal, a 7-member North Carolina Baseball Authority, which would be appointed by state and local officials, would finance, design, own, and operate the MLB stadium, according to the Senate proposal. The authority, that is modeled after the Centennial Authority, which oversees the Lenovo Center, that's where the Carolina Hurricanes play, could enter a land lease for state-owned land to build the stadium and surrounding entertainment district. The piece over at WRAL continues. North Carolina is the most populous state without a Major League Baseball franchise, and a plan would significantly elevate Raleigh's expected bid for Major League Baseball expansion, or put it near the top for any existing team that might be looking to move. And so that's just a little bit, and we'll get into more of this. But that's just kind of the top line of what the debate is and what the discussion is in North Carolina. What is going on in the North Carolina General Assembly? It was back just a couple of months ago. We heard from the leader of the North Carolina Senate and Phil Berger, the leader of the North Carolina House, Destin Hall, that they'd come to an agreement on a state budget, at least the top line numbers on a state budget. We have been waiting for that all throughout the month of May, now all throughout the month of June, with this scheduled final week in Raleigh. All details, all sources are pointing towards the fact that a budget will be unveiled at some point during this week. Obviously, I'll be keeping a close eye on that. You can follow me over on social media on X at Nicholas M. Craig. You can follow the Nick Craig Show over on Facebook. I'll be, if there's any breaking news throughout the day, throw that over there on my social media channels. But I would imagine the reason that the budget, which we were expected to see back a couple of weeks ago, has not materialized could be in part due to this disagreement between Senate and House lawmakers as to whether the state of North Carolina should set aside $500 million. We're not talking about a couple $100,000 here, folks. We're talking about $500 million, $500 million set aside for a government taxpayer-funded baseball stadium. And that is, again, drawing some pretty significant criticism. No big surprise there. As we keep our eye on Raleigh, on what is expected to be the final week of the legislative short session, an interesting article running this weekend over at WRAL News. Sources there getting a sneak peek of a Senate proposal that would allocate some $500 million worth of state funds to a potential bid with Major League Baseball to add an expansion team here in the state of North Carolina. As I've already mentioned, I'm a huge baseball fan, but I'm pretty clear that I don't believe that it is the proper or effective role of state government to be doling out your and my hard-earned taxpayer dollars to a conglomerate ownership group to fund the construction of a Major League Baseball stadium. I mean, that's really kind of the long and the short of this story. Would it be cool to have baseball in Raleigh? Would it be cool to add another professional sports franchise and have 4 major sporting franchises? You've got a basketball team, you've got a football team in Charlotte. Carolina Hurricanes just won the Stanley Cup back just a couple of weeks ago there in Raleigh. Would it be cool to have the 4th major sports franchise here in North Carolina? Absolutely. No question about it whatsoever. And so the question or the discussion then translates into, okay, how do we do this? And I will continue to stand by the point that taxpayers across the state of North Carolina, small businesses across the state of North Carolina should not be on the hook for a major project like this. We're not talking about, building roads. We're not talking about bridge work or other sort of critical infrastructure that the state is involved in. No, we're talking about building a leisure sports facility. You don't need a Major League Baseball team. You don't need sports. Now, I'm a big fan of sports. I enjoy watching sports. It is not a necessary function for your day-to-day life. And so that brings this question in this Senate proposal that was reviewed by WRAL News, calling for $500 million in state funding for the stadium. Back to the article there, it reads, Republicans hold large majorities in both chambers, so they control the budgeting process, but chamber leaders have sparred over big-ticket items in past years. The baseball proposal's potential exclusion from the budget would raise questions about whether investors would move forward with a bid, or if state or local governments would pursue other avenues outside the budget to provide financial backing. The proposal could be introduced later in the legislature, but timing is an issue for preparing a bid. The proposal reads, the message this proposal sends to MLB, if enacted, is that North Carolina has done the work, the legal structure exists, and the financing is authorized, and the market is ready. A spokeswoman for Senate Leader Phil Berger, who has been the lead champion of the proposal, didn't comment to WRAL News over the weekend. However, a spokesperson for House Speaker Destin Hall, who recently expressed his skepticism over spending tax dollars to finance a ballpark, said he is not supportive of appropriating funds for a stadium without more due diligence on a potential return. Others in his caucus in the North Carolina House agree and have some of those same concerns as well. Financial commitments in the proposal would be contingent, obviously, on Major League Baseball, the MLB, approving North Carolina for an expansion or relocation team, and is contained a 4-year sunset provision. If Raleigh isn't picked for a franchise, unspent funds would be sent back to the state's general fund, which is essentially their large checking accounts where all of the money kind of flows in and out of if the Major League Baseball does not choose North Carolina, or if there's no premise of a team actually moving here, that those dollars would be sent back to the general fund and then obviously could be reallocated for other spending, other priorities, other topics here across the state. And so WRAL highlights and mentions some of the concerns from House Speaker Destin Hall, where he has some questions and potential concerns about a return on the investment, ROI, which I'm very glad to hear. One of the things that frustrates me so much with government, and we see this play out in so many different facets at all different levels, from local school boards to city councils, county commissions. See this in the state. We often see this in Washington, D.C. as well. There is very few adults in the room that are willing to ask this question. Okay, you're asking us to allocate a significant amount of taxpayer dollars. I would argue $500 million is a pretty large sum of money. You're asking us to allocate this towards a potential Major League Baseball stadium in Raleigh here in North Carolina. Are the taxpayers, right? Because it's not Destin Hall, it's not Senate Leader Phil Berger's dollars that are being spent. The question is being asked, is this a prudent and good use of taxpayer dollars? Are the individuals, the citizens, the taxpayers throughout the state of North Carolina, are they going to get a good return on their investment? That is the question that is being asked. And unfortunately, for those like myself that are fans of pro sports and would love to see a Major League Baseball team here in North Carolina, unfortunately, all the evidence, all of the research, all of the studies, and I'll have one coming up for you after the break here in just a couple of minutes, all of those studies very clearly point to the answer to that question. Is this a good taxpayer investment? Is there good return on investment on these large sums of dollars being expended by state governments? All answers point to no. It is not the most efficient, most beneficial use of a large sum of money. And that is the reality. As much as I personally have feelings about this, as much as I love pro sports, specifically baseball and football, as much as I would love to see this come to fruition, I've got to look at the data. I've got to look at the evidence. I've got to look at some of the studies that have been done when you're talking about allocating such a large sum of funds. Great comment coming in on the show. If they have an extra $500 million, then take care of Western North Carolina and other things like infrastructure needs. And that's where I think a lot of this discussion plays out. It's not like North Carolina, everything is solved, everything is dealt with. And let's not be naive about this. There's always going to be things that need to be done. There's always going to be money that needs to be spent, right? You're never going to have a position where government goes, wipes its hands clean and says, we did it. We've done everything. All the roads are done. All the bridges are done. All the infrastructure's done. We've spent every dollar we will ever need to, and we're good to go. There's always going to be something more. There's always going to be a new project. There's always going to be a need to spend dollars. And so that's when the question kind of morphs into, okay, if you're going to spend large sums of money, what is the best way to spend it? Where is the best way to spend those dollars? I've got an interesting article that was published in the Journal of Economic Surveys back in 2022 about sports franchises, the venues, and the impacts on the local economy. We'll get into those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the Law Group here in Wilmington and thank them for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, and remind you that if you have any legal questions or challenges, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group right here in Wilmington. Going back to 2003, their experienced attorneys, Melissa Gott and her team, have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of our state. No matter the issue that you are facing, no matter the problem that you might be dealing with, the Law Group will have your back. Their dedicated team ensures that your questions are answered and issues, if there are any, are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, folks. The law group is not some big national law firm. Melissa Gott and her team live right here in southeastern North Carolina, very pivotal parts of our community, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088, or their website, lawgroupnc.com, where you can view all the areas of practice, read the bios on Melissa and the rest of her team. They've got reviews, a blog discussing a variety of different legal matters, all of that available, lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. Call them, reach out to them for any legal questions or challenges, and we appreciate their continued support, continued financial support right here of the Nick Craig Show. All right, quick break. More on Major League Baseball, and should you and I be footing the bill for it, coming up as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this Monday morning, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Monday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we keep a close eye on what is expected to be a very busy week in Raleigh. This is supposedly going to be the final week where state lawmakers are in session, at least for the next couple of months, as the legislative short session is scheduled to wrap up. That is bringing forth additional conversation and discussion about where the current state budget stands. We obviously do not have one currently. Lawmakers announced back a little while ago that they had come to top-line number agreements on a budget. They've been hashing out some of the details in the background over the last couple of weeks, and many sources, some folks I've talked to, have made it pretty clear that they are expecting a budget announcement and details, potentially even a vote this week. So we'll be watching that. That is also parlaying into a pretty good discussion and an interesting story that ran over at WRAL News over the weekend. A couple of their reporters, Brian Humphrey and Jack Hagel, got access to a Senate proposal that would allocate some $500 million here in the state of North Carolina to entice Major League Baseball to look at the state, looking more specifically the state capital in Raleigh for a Major League expansion or an expansion of Major League Baseball, which the commissioner of the league and Rob Manfred has indicated pretty strongly that he does want to expand the league by 2 teams by January of 2029. And so the discussion is not whether baseball is good, whether it would be cool to have baseball here. That is obviously a very subjective thing. The better question, the bigger question, the better discussion is, should taxpayers across the state of North Carolina fund said project? We're talking about, at minimum right now, $500 million, $500 million being set aside out of the state budget to entice Major League Baseball to put into a bid to Major League Baseball to try and bring them to North Carolina. And many proponents of this will make the argument and say, well, yes, because something like this pays for itself. When you bring a professional sports team to a state, when you build a stadium, especially something like baseball where you play 162 games, you've got a large swath of the year where you've got games being played at home, at your home stadium, that there's a large economic impact. That is the argument that many supporters of projects like this will say. Unfortunately, for many of the individuals making those arguments, it's not traditionally backed up in reality. It is not always, and is most of the time, not the case. So I caught this very interesting report from a group of individuals. It was published over at the Journal of Economic Surveys back in September of 2022. The title of the report, which is 88 pages, is called "The Impact of Professional Sports Franchises and Venues on Local Economies, a Comprehensive Survey." The report is written by 3 individuals: John Charles Bradley of Kennesaw State, Dennis Coates of the University of Maryland, and Brad R. Humphreys of West Virginia University. And so before I kind of and I'm not obviously going to go through the entire report, it's 88 pages long. I will have a full copy of it over in the show notes at patreon.com/Nick Craig. Here's the introduction. Between 1970 and 2020, so pretty large range of years, state and local governments devoted $33 billion in public funds to construct major league sports venues in the United States and Canada, with the median public contributing and covering 73% of venue costs. The prevalence of subsidized sports stadiums and arenas spawned an active economic literature evaluating their efficiency at stimulating economic activity. This literature contains nearly universal consensus evidence that sport venues do not generate large positive effects on local economies. Several existing surveys of this literature have documented the strong consensus of what is called null findings. However, this literature expanded considerably since the last comprehensive survey was done. With this survey, the extensive academic literature on economic impact of sports teams and venues on local communities, which included more than 130 articles that spans more than 30 years, most of them being published in the last decade. We document the presence of a clear consensus in the results reported in this literature, with a bunch of other supplementary information in this. Again, it's an entire 88-page report. Here is kind of the abstract, or the survey, and the kind of general consensus of this entire report. Large subsidies commonly devoted to constructing professional sports venues are not justified as worthwhile public investments. The survey also investigates the paradox of local governments continuing to subsidize sports facilities despite overwhelming evidence of their economic impotence. Our analysis informs academic researchers and policymakers to motivate future studies and promote sound policy decisions guided by relevant research findings. Here is really all you need to know. This is a very extensive, I went through the entirety of this report. It is a very extensive report by 3 different individuals, peer-reviewed, published in the Journal of Economic Survey back just a couple of years ago in 2022, showing very clearly that there is not a link between bringing a sports franchise, and in most cases that means a sports venue, and subsidizing that by the taxpayer. And as I mentioned in this report, on average since 1970 to 2020, the public has paid and covered nearly 73% of venue construction costs. And most of these projects are well over $1 billion, at least those that have taken place in the last 20 years. No surprise, it's very expensive to build a 30, 40, or 50, 60,000 person venue and all of the things that are associated with it. It is not something that you do for 10 or $15 million. In many cases, you're in the ballpark of $1.5, potentially $2 billion when it's all said and done to construct these facilities. Now, they last for a long time. Many these professional sports venues are 30 or 40 years old. So you do get some good time out of them. But as this survey shows, and this is one of a couple that I have looked at over the last couple of weeks as this discussion has really kind of kicked off here in North Carolina, all of these surveys very clearly point to the same explanation and the same answer. While there may be some economic impact, and obviously it makes sense, right? You've got games and events happening at these venues, drawing in crowds that are spending money, employees, most I'll note part-time, doing ticketing, security, concession, maintenance, all of those other things. There's no question there is some level of economic impact. There's no question that there is some extra dollars that are spent when you've got a sports franchise. I'm not sitting here and saying, it has no impact at all. The question is it a good return on investment? The state of North Carolina, using my dollars and your dollars, and at least a Senate proposal reviewed by WRAL News, points to $500 million worth of public money being spent. Are the taxpayers that are potentially footing this bill, are they going to see at least a $500 million investment? The answer, from everything that I've read, everything that I've seen, no. Now, this is because we're talking about a state proposal. You're obviously laying it out through the entirety of North Carolina. Great comment coming in. Let the citizens in Raleigh vote for it. Let them decide. I mean, that would be the better way to do it. If Raleigh wants a Major League Baseball team, if a conglomerate of counties in and around Wake want to see Major League Baseball in that area, put a referendum on the ballot. Let voters in those areas where said stadium or said venue or said complex is being built, let them decide whether they want to or not. Let them determine if they want to see their taxes go up pretty significantly to fund the construction of a venue. But you can't build a stadium in Raleigh using taxpayer dollars from across the state of North Carolina and see a direct return on investment for every citizen across the state. It doesn't work when you've got a large group of people, a large group of individuals taking place across the state, when you're literally going from the Tennessee border out west to the Atlantic Ocean on the east, from Virginia to South Carolina. North Carolina, for those who have ever had the pleasure of taking some of those long trips out to the mountains, as I have in the last couple of years, North Carolina is a pretty lengthy state. It takes a while to get back and forth between some of the areas. And so with that, over all taxpayers is bringing this question forward. We are discussing some proposals that are being thrown around up in Raleigh at the North Carolina General Assembly, whether the state should invest nearly $500 million into trying to lure Major League Baseball, the commissioner Rob Manfred, and potential ownership groups to Raleigh, our state capital, to add a Major League Baseball expansion team to the state lawmakers. At least a proposal reviewed out of the North Carolina Senate indicate that lawmakers would want to allocate some $500 million to try and help do this. Multiple peer-reviewed studies looking at these major projects, in many cases $1.5, $2 billion worth of taxpayer dollars over the last 50 years or so, have shown that there is not necessarily a tie between a large taxpayer investment in these facilities, in these venues, and a major spike in economic activity. That is what these studies, these peer-reviewed studies, have shown. And we've got a relatively recent example of this. You look up at what's going on in New York State, right now. It was last week, I think. The Buffalo Bills and the state of New York and everybody in and around Orchard Park up in just outside of Buffalo had a ribbon cutting for the brand new Highmark Stadium, which is going to be the home of the new home of the Buffalo Bills. Taxpayers committed more than $850 million in public money to help construct this facility with a final price tag of over $2 billion. $850 million in public money. And then I caught this I say hilarious, it's not funny, but hilarious article from the New York Post over the weekend. Buffalo Bills fans outraged by outrageous ticket price costs at new stadium where cheapest seats are $700. This is just a little bit of this article. Buffalo Bills fans are bashing outrageous ticket prices to see home games at the team's flashy new Highmark Stadium, where the cheapest seats cost an eye-watering $700. As individuals speaking to WIVB News, that is in Buffalo, one fan saying the ticket prices are outrageous. As of Friday morning, this was last week when this was published over at the New York Post, the cheapest available for a Buffalo Bills regular season home game on September the 17th was $702.10 on Ticketmaster. One loyal Bills fan said, if you have a family with 1 or 2 kids, 4 tickets, that is a lot of money. Another agreed, saying it's scary when you got a family of 4 or 5 and you have to see these kinds of prices to pay for tickets. Many Bills fans worry that they might never see a game in the new stadium, for which taxpayers paid $850 million, as it is slated to be the home of the NFL franchise for at least the next 30 years. The sky-high prices are reportedly being driven by the new stadium, a $2.1 billion price tag, 60,000 seat stadium that broke ground in 2023. So there's an example of a large sum of taxpayer dollars being expensed. And for the voters in the state of New York, for the taxpayers in the state of New York, they did not, in fact, vote on whether they're going to approve this. $850 million worth of taxpayer funds subsidized by the New York legislature, the New York General Assembly, to help construct this stadium. And now, for fans, regular, everyday, middle-class people that go to these games, tailgate in the parking lot, wear the jerseys, hang out through the entirety of the game, regardless of whether their team is winning or not, are now literally boxed out of showing up to the game. And by the way, if they can afford the $700 per ticket price tag, then of course you're spending $16 to $18 on a beer in a plastic cup. You're spending $12 on a hot dog, $9 for popcorn. You're getting completely hosed at the concession. All of this in something that you paid for. All of this in a facility that your taxpayer dollars, your hard-earned money went towards, that you didn't have a say on. And that is the unfortunate reality of so many of these projects. And that is in what large part this academic research study, the impact of professional sports franchises and venues on local economies, that is what a lot of this jumps into. talking about, yes, there is some value, no question about it, in having a professional sports team in an area. I mean, we just saw this with the Carolina Hurricanes winning the Stanley Cup just a couple of weeks ago. More than 180,000 people making their way to downtown Raleigh just not last weekend, but the weekend prior for the celebration parade, the largest single-day event ever in downtown Raleigh. Is there a benefit? Is there an impact? No question about it. But is it $500 million worth of an impact? Is it $850 million worth of taxpayer funds an impact? The answer is no. As a conservative, as an individual who believes that government needs to be limited in its size, scope, and scale, I cannot get behind a project like this. I cannot get behind a situation where taxpayers here in the state of North Carolina have to shell out to build a professional sports stadium that people will not be able to afford to go to. Now, baseball's a little bit different. It's 162 games. It's a much longer season. They play games much more frequently, much more often than in the NHL or the NBA or obviously the NFL football, NFL teams like the Panthers with a relatively limited regular season where there's only so many opportunities to go see your team. All of that is fair. All of that is true. Is it the role of government? And I know some of the response to this is, well, Nick, other states like Tennessee, who is trying to jump in on this and wants a Major League Baseball team, Tennessee is going to offer these incentives, so that's why North Carolina has to. That's just not a good excuse for me. I'm sorry. I mean, we're not talking about, building some facility, investing in some major project that is going to be freely accessible to everybody in the state. You're talking about the state of North Carolina constructing a facility, yes, that, and depending on how it plays out, they would own, that a Major League sports franchise who is able to generate, in most cases, even awful teams, are able to generate hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year worth of revenue on the backs of the same individuals that paid for it. The ability to own a baseball team or a football team or a hockey team or a basketball team in any of the four major leagues is literally a license to print money. You have your stadiums and your facilities packed year in and year out, even if your team is not that good. It is a license to print money. It is a surefire way. Now, obviously, you need a large amount of investment to make it practical, but it's a money printer. You're not going to lose money on your Major League sports franchise. It just doesn't happen. It hasn't happened, even for the worst teams in the worst leagues. So, with that being the case, with it being a very lucrative business deal for an ownership group or an individual or group of individuals to come together and try and convince MLB to bring their facility or bring a team to the state of North Carolina, then they should do that on their own. They should go to private entities, banks, and other lending institutions and get those dollars. It's obviously feasible to have a team, a baseball team here in North Carolina, based on our population, based on our size. It is absolutely economically feasible to be done. But it's the private sector that needs to pay for it, not taxpayers in the entirety of North Carolina. So we will watch and see how things play out in Raleigh this week, what is expected to be the final week of the legislative short session. Is there any debate? Is there any discussion on this? I'll be keeping a close eye on that and bring you the latest as soon as we get it right here on the Nick Craig Show. That is going to do it for a Monday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support, 910-251-6088 or online at lawgroupnc.com. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. Also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app. And is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Enjoy your Monday. We'll do it again tomorrow right here on The Nick Craig Show.